The monastery, which seems to be a citadel isolated in the countryside, is remarkable not only for its modern architectural staircase, which is admirable for its amplitude, majesty and comfort as one ascends it, for the material of the mixed marbles that compose it, but also for its 4 vast dormitories and its eminent tower, built for whatever needs may arise. The convent runs 300 paces and is divided into 3 parts, that is, the temple 60 meters long, the hospice capable of holding more princes built by the 2 Philippi, 2 and 3rd kings of Sicily, and the monastery capable of holding more than 100 religious. History has been stingy in giving us precise information on the arrival of the Simulacrum of the Madonna of Trapani, its author and the start of the devotion. Popular imagination has provided us with more or less plausible legends. Art scholars have worked hard to give a paternity to the block of Paian marble that, obeying an inspired chisel, has become one of the most beautiful images of Maria Santissima. Information on the year of arrival differs among the various scholars. According to Nobile, Galizia, Sorba, Piri, Pugnator, Orlandini, Sereno, Ferro, Mondello and Wyan, this would be between 1188 and 1291. The lack of documentary sources seems to refer to events in 1348, when a plague and subsequent massacre of citizens forced the civic administrators to expel the religious from the convent and church, turning everything into a lazaret. Once the epidemic was over, the public health was forced to burn all the material inside the convent. Other available sources, due to the insult of the times and the negligence of writers, are often controversial. Trapani, a most noble and faithful city, celebrated by ancient writers for its very important port and fishy sea, for the riches of its commerce, and for its fine arts, increased its fame by the coming of the very famous image of the Blessed Virgin Mary that took its name from the city itself. At the foot of Mount Eris, the ancient San Giuliano, stands the sanctuary Basilica of Annunziata with the simulacrum of the Blessed Virgin Mary, symbol of the devotion and love of the city like a sickle. Every Trapanesian has sought comfort, grace and protection in the Virgin in times of misery, epidemics, hunger and famine. The sea has no boundaries, no absolute truths. About the statue's origin, some truths have been stranded in the depths and legends have mingled with other truths. Since the arrival of the simulacrum, its cult has spread to many Mediterranean countries, to Genoa, Sardinia, Great Britain, France, Spain, Germany, the West, Babylon, Turkey and the distant Americas. In Turin, there is a reproduction of the Madonna of Trapani on the high altar of the sanctuary of Our Lady of the Angels. In Wyandotte, a suburb of Detroit, the Holy Family Church venerates the statue placed there by Giuseppe Bellario from Trapani. In Tunisia, the arrival of Our Lady was dated 1880 in La Goulette, a small coastal town near Tunis, where the first procession took place on the 15th of August 1885. The town hosted a community of Sicilians and Trapanians who moved there for work. From 1909, the rite was also celebrated in the capital. These are photos from 1937. In the Gulatino district known as Piccola Sicilia, the procession was very popular. Our Lady was carried by arm as far as the port. The devotional rite made it possible to alleviate the distance from one's hometown. The last procession was held in 1962. Since 2017, that rite, which belongs to all the people of La Goulette, has been resumed as an expression of the closeness of different ethnic groups. Everyone carries a lit candle the size of their height, as a symbol of life, of light that illuminates and guides. Here, the Marian cult upholds social marginality, as it has done since the 13th century, in the arrangement of participants in the Trapani Syrio procession, combining opulence and human misery. In the Tunisian rite, ostentatious wealth represents the redemption and reversal of suffering, pain and poverty. Mary's apotropaic, miraculous, thaumaturgic, almost magical powers sustain the everyday lives of the lower strata of the population and non-Christian believers. The miracles with which the Blessed Mary manifests herself in the difficult moments of existence have always been directed towards the subordinate and the last. The procession thus becomes for those on the margins a moment of redemption and affirmation. Believers and non-believers alike, intercepting the statue's gaze, become enraptured by its charm, and show a devotion steeped in awe and surprise, hope and reverence, emotion and joy. On the 15th of August, the Bedematri, or Amaranusa, or Notre Dame de Trapani, is greeted on the Parvis by shouts of jubilation from Tunisian women, with the typical use and applause even from the Muslim population. The Blessed Virgin is not for the use and consumption of Sicilians or Catholics. Instead, it is proposed as a polyphonic symbol of religious pluralism, overcoming social, cultural, historical, political and religious barriers on Tunisian soil. It seems that the Carmelite monks of Mount Carmel, driven out of Jerusalem, had landed in Trapani in the Swabian Aragonese period between 1200 and 1238. The Senate of Trapani allegedly assigned them the convent of the little church of the Madonna del Parto, just outside the north wall, roughly behind the church of the Collegio dei Gesuiti. They would then replace the table of the Madonna Santissima della Grazia, brought from Jerusalem, no longer able to withstand the crush of the faithful, by commissioning artists from Pisa to create a Madonna and Child. The Carmelite historian Antonio Buzzi said he had copied this report in 1680 from a 15th century manuscript in the Sicilian language. The marble image of the Blessed Virgin of Trapani was venerated in Syria in the church commended to the Knight Templar Gareggio. This image had been transported there from the island of Cyprus, where, according to one tradition, it had been carved in 733 in the castle of Endithet in Famagusta, where it was venerated for about 400 years. The Holy Land, however, was slowly being subjugated by the Turks, and the great Sultan of Babylon, Saladin, attacked the country in 1187 with a mighty army, dashing all hope of salvation. A decisive battle took place in 1244 when the Persian and Syrian knights inflicted a terrible defeat on the Templars, who decided to leave the Holy Land. Gareggio and 2 other knights embarked for Pisa, their homeland. A precious chest was loaded onto the triremes. The Simulacrum had been placed inside to save it from profanation by the infidels. For many days they had a favorable wind, but when they arrived not far from Lampedusa, a furious storm came up and forced them to take refuge on the island. Once the hurricane had subsided, they let down their sails, but shortly afterwards, another more dangerous storm advised them to seek shelter in the port of Trapani. Here they stayed for many months to attend to the ship's restoration. However, when they decided to set sail again, 1,000 hitches delayed their departure. So it was that the Pisan knights realized by divine inspiration that the Madonna, for the time being, wanted to remain in Trapani, and decided, before continuing the voyage, to hand it over to the Pisan consul to be embarked at the first propitious opportunity. After a brief storage in the ammunition warehouse, the statue was placed in the small church of the Madonna del Parto, officiated by the Carmelite priests. In the year 1244, the opportunity arose for Consul to send the statue to Pisa by ship bound for Livorno. He had the image placed on a cart drawn by oxen to take it to the pier, but the meek animals, having received the first lash, were so fast in running that human strength was not enough to hold them back, or even make them straighten their way to the destined place, but stubbornly took the land route. Along the way, countless prodigies occurred, until they reached the door of the small church of Santa Maria Nunziata alla Gerga. People urged the beasts to continue or turn back, but every attempt was futile. A huge crowd witnessed the prodigy, and, attributing this to divine will, forced the consul to order the statue to be put down from the cart and placed in the small church in Contrada Gerga. The Carmelite priests, who had moved there because they could not reside within the city as hermits, came out in procession and received the sacred image with great jubilation, as Our Lady had shown that she had chosen their home as her own. According to another version, it was brought to Trapani between 1340 and 1360 during the struggle for city supremacy between the Chiaramonti and Ventimiglia del Bosco families. The latter had the worst of it, and the Pisans, their allies, paid the consequences by having the statue confiscated and transported to the small church of the Madonna del Parto. The Madonna continued to perform miracles and receive alms. The Senate of Trapani, urged by the people, authorized the statue to be moved on an ox cart to the church of Santa Maria Annunziata alla Gerga, officiated by the Carmelite priests, who thus went from being its custodians to its owners. Considering the causal activity of the abbey, their patronage over the Church of Carmelo, and the Pisan origin of the statue, another hypothesis supposes that the simulacrum landed in Trapani transported by the Pisan galleys that sailed the Mediterranean. It may have been plundered with the rest of the cargo by corsairs, kept in the church of Santa Maria Annunziata alla Gerga, and subjected to the patronage of the abbey. Stripped of legendary overtones, estimating the arrival of the simulacrum in the Aragonese period, Sereno wrote that the Senate entrusted it to the Carmelite friars no later than 1360. The paternity of the work was attributed by authors such as Cosentino, Venturi and Polizzi to Tuscan figurative artists of the late 14th century, Nino Pisano, and his father Andrea, to whom it was commissioned in the mid-1400s. Based on findings such as the drapery, the elongated face and the sweetness of the smile, authoritative scholars, such as Ciascia, Scuderi and others confirmed the authorship to Nino Pisano. Nevertheless, the fascination of the legend about the arrival of the Madonna remains unchanged. For certain, Mary chose as her home a liminal site, due to its distance from the city walls and promiscuous given its pagan past dedicated to the cult of the goddess Venus. The statue called Virgin and Child is made of Carrara marble, confirmed by the latest conservative restoration, is 165 centimeters high and weighs 15 quintals. Canonical priest Fortunato Mondello described it as follows: standing upright, clothed in a long, white, folded mantle, she holds the child with her left arm, and with her right she lingers her hand, which is placed close to her breast. The son's predilection for the mother is revealed in the expression of her childlike face, in the eloquence of her eyes, fixed on her face, Mary's charity in the whole attitude of her countenance, which, leaning a little to the left, seems to understand all the divine sentiments of the Son. Mary does not look at him, for the gaze has turned to those who aim in her. And this is the idea that exalts the devout pilgrim. Mary listens to the child in the slight inclination of her head, as well as to the prayers of her devoted children, fixing her gaze on their faces, and expressing her understanding of the power of religious piety. In her forehead is finally manifested that arcane sentiment that powerfully enamors and moves. Priest Octavio Cayetano wrote of the presence on the hems of the mantles of the child and the mother of some Aramaic letters, painted in gold: "Greet God who is great though small, he is however, just and sweet." On the Virgin's breast a beautiful ornament, round in shape, with the words, "Behold the handmaid of God." On the hem of the robe on the left, I believe that this is the Great Mother of God, on the right the date the 15th of August. At the base, finished and carved in Endithet, village of Cyprus. On the inside of the mantle at the back, I, servant of God, priest. No sign is visible today. It will have disappeared from the kisses impressed by the faithful over the centuries, or the handkerchiefs rubbed in token of devotion. Benefiting from the donations of the people, the Virgin was adorned with a resplendent robe covered with innumerable precious votive offerings that concealed her features. Stripped of those precious ones, she showed herself beautiful, clear, perfect and harmonious. A few years after the move from the church of Madonna del Parto to the small church of Santa Maria Annunziata alla Gerga, the Carmelites obtained by donation on August 24, 1259 from the notary Domenico Ribaldo degli Abati and his first wife Parma Donas, a large garden with a well, a Roman church of modest size, useful for a small number of worshippers such as the peasants of the abbate's own family might have been, named Santa Maria Annunziata alla Gerga, with connected convent, allocated outside the city that insisted on a tenement of land known as Hania farms, equipment of men and animals, an apotheca, a taberna, a well, 2 cini and a store at Terzana, near the sandy landing La Rena. The existence of this birth and workshop in Terzana allowed us to consider how ancient is the relationship that binds the Annunziata and its sanctuary to seafaring. On April 4, 1289, they acquired by bequest from Donna degli Abati, businesswoman and second wife of Ribaldo, the territories of Chinia, Danimaggi, Agnone and a flourishing garden in front of the convent. With this donation, Donna obtained at the church a burial ground for herself and her husband, who had overseen its construction. The transcriptions of the will were attended by the very young friar Alberto degli Abati, born in Trapani in 1240, who was related to Donna to whose needs as an elderly and ill woman she devoted herself, having also played a decisive role in the abbate's choices and in the birth of the shrine, while he was alive. Trapani's 14th century history provides two certainties. The statue arrived from the sea, at that time the most obvious means of communication. In the 1300s a sacred image, predating the present simulacrum, was in the small church of Santa Maria Nunziata alla Gerga. Pilgrimages, devotional practices, veneration, and the plenary indulgence granted by Nicholas IV to those who visited the simulacrum, whose church already manifested limitations in reception, attest to this. In view of the presence of a sandy path from the walls to the church, it was thought to be enlarged. On August 7, 1307, Alberto degli Abati ceased to live in Messina. Frederick II of Aragon from 1315 increased the factory with alms, contributions from institutions and religious, and part of the sums collected from the fish tax. He also granted the consuls to hold the Kyrio procession, with the gift of a candle, and decreed a fair on the floor of the sanctuary. In general, he wanted to improve the appearance and fortify the structure by enlarging the convent to accommodate the growing community of Carmelites and distinguished visiting lay and ecclesiastical figures. An initial three-aisled rustic, and then the main elevation, was completed in the mid-1300s. Around 1372 small chapels were built in the area behind the apse of the Gothic church, a larger one dedicated to Sant'Alberto, and a smaller one dedicated to San Giovanni. The chapels opened onto a single room, in which the statue of Our Lady had been placed. At the beginning of the Spanish era, at the behest of Frederick III of Aragon, a procession was organized on August 15, starting from the Porta Austriaca, or Porta della Madonna, and along Annunziata Street, to mark the Feast of the Cyrae to collect offerings to help build the Great Temple. Over the years it was moved to March 25, Annunciation Day, then to the Monday after Easter, and then again to August 15. At the same time, a fair was held within the enclosure of the sanctuary, the management of which had been granted to the University of Trapani since 1302. The procession was preceded by the slaves, followed by the Carmelite community with the cross in front, keeping behind the respective classes of the craftsmen, the Mercii on the left, on the right the Speziali, in the center the Mercanti, then came the Girati with the Regio Serio and the Ver with musicians. They would go to the Temple of the Annunciation, and present the annual offering to the Virgin. The wooden Ver, also called machinet or pyramite, bore the insignia of their respective classes, and were followed by musical instruments. The maestrances threw confetti, blessed bread, green almonds, browned chickpeas and more to the people. The consul of each maestrance collected alms for the temple. Proceeds from the fair and offerings from the faithful for the procession enabled the completion of the shrine in 1332. Due to disputes that arose between the consuls, the Carmelites, and the Senate over the management of the procession and the offerings, it lost its characteristics, and was abolished in 1779. Faithful and pilgrims, after visiting the simulacrum, wished to purchase a memento of it. About 40 artistic artisan workshops in Trapani, present mainly in the Street of the Sculptors, or Corollari, in the 13th and 14th centuries, reproduced devotional copies for liturgical or domestic worship in coral, alabaster, mother of pearl and ivory. Today they are found scattered around the world. For example, Andrea Careca made one in amber for the then King of Poland. The late Gothic period saw in 1423 the construction of the little portico in front of the temple's facade, and 10 years later, in the La Reina locality, the construction of the bridge for access to the church. Trapani seafarers distinguished into fishermen, and sailors asked and obtained to erect their own chapels near the temple. The fishermen fabricated their own chapel in the Gothic style, dating from 1476, inside the church. The sailors in the period from 1514 to 1552 renovated and enlarged the Chapel of the Resurrection, which today houses the Blessed Sacrament, of Renaissance layout, with references to Sicilian architecture of the Norman period and Gothic Catalan influences. It is cubic in shape with a dome made of concentric rings of calcarenite, connected to the octagonal drum with 4 corner niches and shells inside them. The shell, recurring in the temple, represents fecundity as the beginning of new life, purification, and rebirth of the spirit. The simulacrum from its arrival belonged to the Pisans, and the university acquired ownership. The Senate, after appointing the Carmelites as custodians of the statue, reached an agreement with them. It would assign the best arrangement, obliging them on the other hand to finance the construction of the large convent and church building. A board of trustees was then set up consisting of proxies from both sides to manage the movements aimed at the birth of the new complex, and the devotional donations, which had become so copious as to suggest to the prior of the convent in 1522, to take over some of them in order to sell them and buy useful furnishings, as reported by the notary Giuliano Summa, on March 5 of the same year. This council had full powers until the years before the First World War. The ex-votos represented the gratitude of the humble and the powerful toward the mother, testifying to the handicraft productivity as the historical artistic heritage of this land. The list of valuables was accurately described in Vincenzo Nobile's catalogue, which, however, was no longer updated. As part of the rich treasure of Our Lady, among the most valuable pieces, in addition to the pair of crowns of the 2 coronations, all made of the purest gold and studded with precious stones, are a monstrance with bezel and shrine, a chalice and pyx in solid gold and embossed work, as well as numerous gold, silver and silver-gilt chalices, filigree parures, pearl quilts, bracelets, necklaces and thousands of coral rings and productions. The statue placed outside the city walls made pilgrimages difficult, forcing the Senate to move it frequently within the city. The occasion was propitious to get the citizenry to overcome states of anxiety, fear or discontent generated by incursions, invasions, threats and pestilence, by appealing to faith and devotion. Soon, however, disputes arose between the Senate and the Carmelites, who advanced rights to precedence and participation in the processions, claimed exclusive ownership of the simulacrum, demanded a private right to worship, and opposed the transportation of Sant'Alberto. A later agreement stipulated that the jurors would protect the simulacrum in the event of war or calamity, with the burden of transporting it within the walls, placing it in the yet-to-be-built Carmelite Gancia. While waiting, the Gancia of San Filippo would be earmarked to celebrate the divine offices by the Carmelites themselves. When the danger ceased, the statue would return to the convent. And so, because of the sanctuary's remoteness from the city, various transfers of the simulacrum were made, which, depending on the circumstances, joyous or sorrowful, socio-political or devotional, were called transport or procession, almost always finding immediate shelter at the Gancia of San Filippo, close to the city walls, near the Castello di Terra. Many transports were accounted for by Friar Benigno di Santa Caterina and Carmelite priest Gabriele Monaco. A transfer seems to have occurred in 1476, but without the officialdom of any source. On October 11, 1527, a formidable armada composed of 100 well-armed galleys, mixed of French, Genoese and Venetians, who wanted to subjugate Trapani, suggested that a transport be implemented that saw the simulacrums sheltering at the church of San Giuliano. A few years later, the sailors finished the structural work on their chapel, and after 10 years it was the turn of the fishermen. Meanwhile, the friars and the patron family of Ventimiglia del Bosco decided to renovate and transform the rooms of the 2 medieval chapels, that of San Giovanni and that of Sant'Alberto, as well as another small room, formerly considered the Little Room of Sant'Alberto. Francesco Ventimiglia del Bosco, during the priory of Friar Luigi di Aiuto, commissioned Antonello Gagini in 1531 to design the triumphal arch for access to the Cecellum of Our Lady. In 1534, 82 galleys of Ariadne known as Barbarossa, king of Algiers and famous Turkish corsair, had boarded the lighthouse of Messina, and much to be feared. So our ancient friars took caution with transporting to the city the venerable statue, which remained sheltered at the Gancia of San Filippo from October 3rd to 13th. On August 15, 1537, after Gagini's death, the triumphal arch in the chapel of the Beata, an example of the Sicilian Renaissance, was delivered. It shows the embossed profiles of 10 prophets in the pillars, the figures of the announcing angel and the Virgin in the medallions of the pendentives, the figure of the Almighty Father in high relief surrounded by winged cherubs in the tympanum, the statues of Sant'Elia and Sant'Eliseo on the cimiums, added during the 1600s, and the decorations in acanthus leaves, rosettes, garlands, and festoons. In the same year, the construction of the Fisherman's Chapel was completed, which features a grand ogival arch, a ribbed octagonal-shaped roof. There are remains of frescoes on the walls, as well as in the vaults, which date from 1537. The sacred statue was transported again in 1544, because the Turkish corsair Dragut threatened the city with 10 warships. Around 1550 Egidio Onesti was born of a noble Trapani family. He entered the order in 1565. His personality engraved on the works in the Carmelite Palace, also thanks to the relations he had with secular, civil and political powers. His was the introduction of Sicilian mannerism in the Trapani area, thanks to his collaboration with Palermitan masters and artists such as the architect-sculptor Iacopino Salemi and the painter Giuseppe Alvino, known as Illinois Sozzo. On June 10, 1553, due to the presence of Turkish armies near the coast, again a transport. Again the shelter was the Gancia of San Filippo. At the same time, there was the spread of the ex voto of popular origin, a small painting on panel depicting a situation of risk experienced, in which a grace had intervened through the invocation to Our Lady of Trapani. It represented, as defined by Professor Angelo Turchini, a document of custom, priceless faith, and a primary artistic phenomenon. There were specialized artisan workshops that displayed the sign "Here miracles are made." The convent itself ordered outside the tablets of miracles, commissioning them from a certain Raphael Pittui. At the shrine there is a gallery displaying a collection of ex-votos related to maritime, peasant, artisan, and even social activities. In the foreground figure the scene of danger, at the top inside an oval the figure of Our Lady invoked, sometimes together with San Francesco di Paola. On May 10, 1563, gave impetus to such a transport the 30 Turkish galleys that appeared near Trapani, ready to wage war on the city. The simulacrum was placed in the church of San Giovanni della Disciplina, since the church of San Filippo was occupied by Spanish soldiers. Almost a year later, due to movements of the Turks, it was placed initially in the parish church of San Nicolo, and after a few days it was transferred to the Gancia of San Filippo, freed of the Spanish soldiers. In this coming the Virgin gave in an astonishing manner health to 2 beggars, blind the one, strangled the other, both of whom helped each other in their needs. And because from such misery good proceeds were drawn from the piety of the faithful, fearful of losing it in meeting with the prodigious statue of Mary, which they heard approaching to the noise of the celebrating people, they gave themselves to flee the meeting by the street near the church of San Domenico. And because the statue was to be placed in the church of San Nicolo, it was therefore led along the street denominated the Rua Nuova. When the fugitives in passing from the height of the street called the Cisa di San Domenico, they were at once discovered by the keenest eye of the Virgin, and by admirable force to the blind she gave him sight, and the swift step she granted to the paralytic. In 1569 the presence of Turkish armies urged another transfer. Again in 1576, because of a fierce contagion, and was placed in the Gancia of San Filippo. In this transport the Virgin granted to a paralytic health, who full of lively faith invoking her, remained in the face of all the people instantly dissolved from his illness. After demolishing a small tower of the sailors' chapel, a causa cae faciam patio, it began in 1581 the construction of the chapel of San Vito, later also dedicated to Santa Teresa, today of the Sacro Cuore. In that year, on December 8, the Senate proclaimed Sant'Alberto the main patron saint. In 1582 the church was enriched with a magnificent bronze lectern, ordered by Prior Egidio Onesti based on designs by Iacopino Salemi and cast by Annibale Scudeniglio from Trapani. In that year the renovation of the Fardella Chapel dedicated to Sant'Alberto degli Abbati from Trapani began, and the construction of the chapel of San Vito was completed. The Carmelites had long planned to build their Gancia in the historic center to periodically move the statue there and as an infirmary. After acquiring the land near Porta Felice, or Boxeria, urged on by the collapse of Gancia di San Filippo, construction began in 1587. The Annunziata complex increasingly resembled cathedrals of Gothic origin that were pilgrimage destinations. It became a complex temple in which pilgrims found relics and devotional statues such as the prophet Sant'Elia, the head relic of Sant'Alberto, the first Sicilian Carmelite saint from the Trapani convent, and San Vito, whose head relic the Carmelites had managed to possess. In more recent times, in 1948, it was enriched with the silver and crystal reliquary in Gothic style, work to the design of architect and engineer Attilio Odiscia Morone, containing the left humerus and mandible of Carmelite blessed Luigi Rabata, and under the high altar, the figure of a saint dressed as a soldier, covered with liturgical clothing containing various reassembled bones belonging to San Clemente Martyr. To discover the blessed one passes behind the high altar where Rosario Matera's Annunciation, from 1770, is placed in the background. Through two doors from 1500 one reaches the chapel. Suddenly one feels enveloped by a hazy soft light conducive to prayer and contemplation that accompanies one toward a place as precious as a casket, not only because of the richness of the ornaments, but because of the isolation with the outside. It conveys privacy and hides a mystery. It seems to be the entrance that leads to paradise. In the transition from the chapel of Our Lady to the chapel of the Sacro Cuore, is the shelter of Our Lady, because it was placed there to shelter from bombing during World War II. On the front wall is a painting by Carmelite Gabriele Saggi. Below, a plaque commemorates the historic event. The Carmelites could not allow the pilgrims to suffer not only the exhausting pilgrimage but also the wait for the visit to the Simulacrum. Initially they spent the night hours in the church. Appropriate permissions were thus requested from Pope Sixtus V, and as early as 1583 they were received in the lavender rooms, located on the ground floor of the convent, used by the Pia Opera della Lavanda dei Piedi ai Pellegrini, connected to the confraternity of the Ficarella. On June 19, 1586 it fell to the Pope to finally redeem the long-standing issues that had arisen between the university and the Carmelite priests, with a bull of his own. 2 years later, due to the return of the Turks to the city, a new relocation was implemented. In 1590 Basilio Cavaretta was born. From a noble Trapani family, he renounced the comforts of civil life to wear the Carmelite habit. He became meritorious for relevant works carried out in the convent and for substantial allocations from private wealth. The following year, the Viceroy of Sicily Diego Enriquez Guzman, Count of Alba de List, commissioned the Gate of the Sacellum of Our Lady, desired by Prior Ligio Fiorentino from Trapani, designed by architect-sculptor Iacopino Salemi and made by founderman Giuliano Mazzara from Palermo. It consists of fishing net meshes, with flat knots symbolizing the unbreakable feeling of love of the sailors and Trapanians for Mary. Behind the grate, in the center stands the Virgin on an altar with 8 Ionic shafts arranged in a semicircle, embellished with Corinthian capitals. In 1592 the Viceroy of Sicily himself, satisfied with the result achieved, said, "Whoever sees her wants her more beautiful, go to paradise." And the wife of Pietro Fuxado, Marquis de Los Valles, exclaimed, "Never will this Virgin of Trapani fall from my heart." The construction of the Carmelites' Gancia ended in 1596. It was dedicated to Madonna del Carmine. A plaque was affixed to the corner of the church, as a reminder that since 1587 a statue of Our Lady had been placed inside it in the imminence of war. 2 years later, another transport. Drought is a great chastisement from God, because it deprives the countryside of the necessary element at the proper time and endangers the harvest. Upon the surviving death of Prior Egidio Onesti in May 1611, the sculptor-architect Iacopino Salemi was brought in to prevent work on the church complex from stalling. In memory of Prior, the painter Giuseppe Alvino in the canvas, the name of Jesus depicted him among other clergymen. July 11, 1614. She had occasion for cause and fear of 11 Ottoman vessels, which bordered near Trapani and threatened the city with some hostile insult. Just a year later, for fear of barbarous new assault against the city. In the same year, Don Pietro Girone, Duke of Asuna, donated a silver lampstand with its chain that was placed in the chapel for the decoration of the same in infinity and perpetuity, and in such place remain, and not otherwise. In the painting by an unknown author from 1735, relating to a procession of the Madonna returning to her shrine, exhibited at the Museo Pepoli in Trapani, the presence of a pond overlooking the facade and a section of raised street are highlighted. A bridge connects the island and the sandy shore La Rena with the territory at the foot of Mount Eris. For its part, the Orlandi view highlights the presence of the urban moat with the bridge to the city, and the salt pans connected to a vast lagoon depression that joins with the sea. The salt pans, visible in both works, suggest that the area was originally sea and constituted in ancient times the port of the city of Eris first and Trapani later. Subtracting the salt pans from the plan of the city, it is possible to imagine the extent of this port serving the mountain and the plain, referred to in ancient times as Drapana, that is, the sickles, allowing Pugnator's expression far more harbour than remained from then, to be revealed. Leaving the walls appears the Strata della Nociata, marked as a path which, having passed the wooden bridge of the Annunziata, finds an altar in the middle of the road with a crucifix. In a later map of 1855, the stretch of land closest to the city, having disappeared the moat, is represented by the dense marshes of the Murinella crossed by the road that, near the ancient northern inlet, veers in the direction of the temple. The Carmelites had long demanded improvements to the sandy road leading to the shrine and the construction of a bridge capable of crossing the water channel. It seems that Cavalier Giacomo Ravida, a very devout man, had ordered at his own expense, "Let there be finished the whole road that goes from this city to the Blessed Virgin Mary, so that more comfortably we may go to that holy journey, and then pave with flat plank stones the whole sandy road." Thus was born the Jakarta. On September 6, 1636, due to a new movement of Mohammedan invasion, a new relocation was implemented. A few years later, work began on the construction of a building body in the convent that would house the Scalone Magnifico, author the master contractor Francesco Marchesi from Palermo. Due to a horrible famine, in 1641 another transport took place. And again in 1645 again, due to the presence of Turkish armies. With a view to the renovation of church buildings desired by the Catholic Reformation, Prior Basilio Cavaretto encouraged work on the cloister loggia to improve the reception of the convent. To commemorate this, the year 1650 was engraved at the base of a column, as well as the prior's name on some of the capitals of the southern porch. And so on the upper floor, bright and spacious corridors housed the cells of the friars of the community. On the ground floor the Orla Capitular, and the Scalone Magnifico. From here passed the solemn procession of the religious who, crossing the vast hall that opens at its foot, through a door now walled up, proceeded from the sacristy leading to the church singing the divine praises. In the large cloister, the 80 Tuscan columns, supporting round arches, favored the meditation and worship of the friars. Here rich vegetation recalled the typical garden of Mount Carmel in Palestine, with flowers and plants that were watered with Our Lady's water, a source of life that purifies and renews the spirit, collected in a cistern and coming from the Garden of Defile. From 1626, in order to avoid during transport the damage caused by the movement of the wagon, the simulacrum was placed on a coffin carried on the shoulders of sailors following solemn processions of clergy, senate and people. On October 30, 1654, a new transport was carried out, when the French armada strong with 26 vessels and 6 galleys appeared in Favignana, under the conduct of Monsignor Gbisa. But on hearing from the aforesaid armada the transport of the simulacrum, because of the reverberation of the salutation made to the Virgin in the passage to the fortresses of her city, it sailed of an instant the anchors and making a general salutation to the Virgin, sailed elsewhere. She also signaled the Virgin this coming by granting at the mere contact of the coffin perfect health to Giacomo Panari cracked, to Giuseppe Greco mute of 6 years, and to a poor paralytic free passage. In the chapel of Our Lady there is an organ from 1630 along with a large number of silver lamps of very fine workmanship. The walls of the castellum were covered in 1661 with auburn and dense carpet of small inlaid polychrome marbles, the so-called miscae, and tremiscae in silver is the antependium made in 1640, the silver tabernacle, the work of Bernardo Boniuto of 1770, and the grandiose candelabra on the sides of the gate, donated by Don John of Austria on August 16, 1652. The candelabra and angels next to the statue, carved in 1840 by Alberto Alio and Francesco Mariano from Trapani, were covered in silver by fellow citizen Giuseppe Costadura. Prior Basilio Cavaretta died on March 7, 1665. In the canvas Pentecost by an unknown Alvinian, it is possible to identify him as the kneeling Carmelite on the lower right. 2 years later, the simulacrum was given the name of Maria Santissima of Trapani, and after 3 years the Chapel of the Blessed was completed. 10 years after the death of Prior Basilio Cavaretta, the bell tower erected in place of the previous ones in the Renaissance, and even earlier medieval style, for the construction of which 3,000 scudi were consumed. The chief master mason Simone Pisano erected this bell tower of his own design, and with his skill a great honor he did to his native Trapani. This bell tower is famous for its masterly workmanship, with a staircase inside shaped like a snail and with 4 harmonious bells. On the same facade a rose window with 12 small columns and crossed arches, similar to that of the church of Sant'Agostino, of the sunburst type over the main portal of access to the temple. From the top of the bell tower the sacred bronzes spread their melodious sound over the countryside, and over the white expanse of the salt pans, to which the bells of the numerous churches responded in chorus. The grandeur of the bell tower suggests that it had been not only useful for the call of the faithful, but also a point of observation, given its location in the open countryside and very close to the sea. The Fardella Chapel, dedicated to Sant'Alberto, was completed in 1676 on commission of the Fardella families of Torriassa and Taipa. It is entered from the Chapel of Our Lady through 2 carved doors in the Renaissance style. Numerous paintings are placed on the walls. On the Baroque altar formed of miscae and tremiscae marble stands the silver statue of Sant'Alberto. Next to it is his little cell. One has access to the sacristy through a massive wooden door commissioned by Antonio L. Affamato and Jeremia de Modica in 1729. Down the few steps, to the left, 3 cabinets with chests of drawers hold sacred vestments, altar linens and liturgical books. 3 large windows overlook the cloister, allowing, from dawn to dusk, daylight to enter. The vault is frescoed with 3 subjects, by Domenico La Bruna from the first half of the 1700s. The walled city stretched as far as today's Via Trentageneo, and beyond the wall was a dingy, wide sandy shore. In the city, the Marian effigy was present on the facades of several churches, Sant'Agostino, San Lorenzo, and Sant'Alberto, as well as Palazzo Cavaretta, and at the port. It was easy for devotees to locate the shrine, because of the square outline, but crossing that desert by a narrow, winding street represented a sacrifice, an exposure in winter to the weather and in summer to the torrid heat, not to mention the risk of possible robbery. The need to have a more adequate organization of the route that led pilgrims to the place of worship led in 1681 the Murafabbri Francesco Maurici, Niccolo and Giuseppe D'Amico to engage with Giacomo Scafidi, procurator of Don Giuseppe del Bosco, to improve the inclinato of the road to safeguard it from the brackish marshes. Building the first 24 arches that were to serve as shelter for pilgrims from rain and sun. To build some small chapels as stations for the pilgrims. Looking at the view by Anonymous in the Museo Pepoli, it seems that the architecture of the little chapels on the roadside may be based on the model of the shrine of Santa Crescenzia near San Vito lo Capo. Near the shrine, the road runs alongside some warehouses. These could be the stazuna, where bricks and earthenware were made. Near the church one glimpses a gushing fountain and a trough that must have been in connection with each other, and again a small monument surmounted by a cross of which Pugnator made mention. For devout and rememberable memory of that esbarcamento was above some degrees of stone that cross also of stone raised, which today about a short pull of an arch further west of the Monastero della Nunziata in the middle of the public street can be seen. In 1689 master builder Simone Pisano executed the ballottato over the inchiancato of the road that led from the city near the Porta San Filippo to the church. He also repaired some small chapels by building others in the city, on the finish of the Quarterari, in the house of the Senator, and near the Porta dei Goli. The road crossed and lapped Lago Scipio, whose reclamation for agricultural purposes began later in 1810 dragging on until the end of the century. After the mid-1800s, in addition to the lake, the navigable canal that bordered the salt pans was also filled in. In 1693 a miniature of the historic centre of Trapani in silver foil was placed at the foot of the Simulacrum, honoured by Don Marcello Sieri Pepoli and Don Marcello Carafa, Trapanian's nobles, on the occasion of the earthquake of the same year, in gratitude to the Virgin for having protected the city and the Trapanetians. The Senate vowed to celebrate the Triduum each year by going in grand parade to the shrine. The Trapanesian mid-August, known in Sicily as early as the 17th century, was as great and beautiful as the city could offer to outsiders and citizens alike. It lasted 4 days starting on August 13th, and preceded the solemn feast of the patron Sant'Alberto. Thanks to the Pereira collection, we acquire a pass, dated March 6, 1691, during the government of Sicily by King Charles II of Spain, signed by Viceroy Giovan Francesco Pacico, provided to the Calabrian pilgrim Giuseppe Fedeli, who had landed in Messina and arrived in Palermo on February 19, 1691, intending to continue to Trapani to pay homage to the Virgin. The guards at the Senator stopped him, keeping him under observation. Since there was no danger of contagion, the Viceroy authorized the Board of Health to release Fedeli so that he could reach his final destination. On August 12, members of the Congregazione del Crocifisso known as La Ficarella went to the shrine to wash the feet of the many pilgrims, providing food for the needy. That is why in Trapani they used to say, "A Santa Chiara lu straniu colla." On the first day of the fest an orchestra would go through the city to cheer the people's stroll. In the afternoon the horse race would start from the Castello di Terra and reach the pallium placed at the Porta dei Cappuccini. In the evening, wooden parameters with oil-filled cups were lit, and barrels of pitch were burned along the bank in front of the Columbia. In time the race was moved to the more spacious marina. The main streets, the senatorial palace and communal dwellings were lit. At the loggia the fireworks machina was planted, hexagonal, lined with firecrackers, ending in a spire. At the top, topped by the globe, sat the Statue of Peace, which with torch in hand set fire to the armaments arranged below with firecrackers and fireworks, creating spectacular colored lights. On the second day, at 9 p.m. the exit of 3 machine, with large wooden scenery covered and decorated with papier-mâché figures and accompanied by characters on horseback was organized. Two small floats were lined up in front of the senatorial palace, preceding a larger one with the wooden statue of Our Lady, covered by a veil called cortinaggio, which at 10 p.m., with the sound of bells, was pulled at the same time as the same thing happened inside the shrine. The tirata dei set veli that covered the marble statue, known as the Calata di Attila, or a festa euskamogiu, celebrated the sense of mystery and veneration. By praying before the uncovered face of the Queen of Heaven, felt as a living presence, one was certain to obtain graces. Vows were dissolved, hoping for miraculous healings even for the obsessed and Spertiti, whose illness was attributed by popular credulity to the presence of an inhabitant of darkness. A festa euskamogiu was in time erased. On the third day, those convicted of civil debts were released from prison. At 11 p.m., the Senate on horseback reached the temple to receive the blessing. The senatorial palace and city streets had great illumination, as did the hinterland and the islands. Music entertained people, fireworks were played in the coastal area, and a large altar lit with candles was set up at the marina. The fourth day was consecrated to the Virgin with the solemn procession of the wooden statue that was carried on the shoulders of select sailors dressed in white. Two long ranks of processionists, with lighted lanterns, gave decorum to the religious procession, and the jubilant people shouted, "Viva Maria di Trapani." One more transport for a packing that gripped Trapani for 2 years. Then on the 2nd of July 1717, the venerable statue of Mary was brought from the millenary to the Church of the Carmine at 22 o'clock on Monday. 3 armies, namely the Spanish, the Savoyards and the Germans, were seen in Sicily at that time. For the celebrations of the supposed 1000th anniversary of the statue's construction, the Senate of Trapani also decided to set up the altars, the fixed machine and the triumphal arches, the decorations and lights on the balconies and windows, and the usual illuminations for those nights, not only in the city, but also along the long stretch of about 1,500 steps that leads to the great Temple of the Lady. Having arrived on the ground floor of the Castello di Terra, it was greeted by the firing of 40 cannons, and after a long tour of the streets, arrived at the end at 6 o'clock at night, around 2 in the morning, and stopped on the Senate Hall floor from where it departed. The litanies of the Virgin were sung by the aforementioned musicians, echoed by the people more with tears of affectionate tenderness than with their voices. At the end of which it was once again greeted by the firing of 40 cannons, thus bringing to a close the beautiful period of these 5 days of never-to-be-seen-again festivities. On that occasion, on the 14th of March 1734, the Vatican chapter, in a ceremony never before celebrated in Sicily, solemnly crowned the simulacrum of the Virgin and Child on account of its antiquity, the prodigies performed and the concourse of peoples. At 11 p.m., considering that the marble statue was at risk of injury, the wooden copy owned by the Trapanese nobleman Giovanni Ferro was taken from the Carmine Church in procession to the Regent Parish. A procession through the city streets followed. Again a shelter of Our Great Lady Mary brought by the Marinarians to the Church of the Carmine at 21 o'clock on Thursday, because of the war between the Spanish and the Germans. On the 7th of September, the packing began. On the 13th of July 1735 the Spanish entered the first entrenchment of the city, at 11:30. On the 31st of July 1735 the Spaniards entered the city victoriously at about 14 o'clock. It would seem that the oil on canvas housed in the regional museum, Agostino Pepoli, that an anonymous painter from Trapani of the school of Domenico la Bruna made, probably commissioned by the Carmelite friars in memory of this transport, dates back to this period. A bird's eye view depicts, in line with the mythological legend of its creation, the sickle-shaped city within the walls with its 3 quarters, the Castello di Mare, the Castello di Terra, the Torre di Ligni, the Egadi Islands, the salt pans and the feudal village of Paquico. The procession route departs from the walled city to the Carmelite complex. It is well traced, highlights the sacred edicules, and shows the simulacrum heading towards the temple accompanied by religious, civil and military authorities, and the faithful in 18th century clothing. In 1741, the Senate of Trapani ordered the demolition of the little porch in front of the temple's facade. It also established the intervention ad meliorum formam reducere of the building, assigning it to the architect Giovan Boggio Amico, with the demolition of the 3 Gothic naves, and the construction of a great hall in Baroque Renaissance style with 16 monolithic columns of Petropalazzo stones and silvered stuccos. The Scalone Magnifico was also completed, and silversmiths Vincenzo Boniuto and Michele Tumbarello made the silver reliquary statue of Sant'Alberto. In the year 1754, Giovan Boggio Amico died. The work was directed by his collaborator, architect Luciano Gambina. Furthermore, it would appear that there was still a transport, but without the officialdom. 10 years later, work on the reconstruction of the temple and the ornamental finishing touches were completed. On the 6th of August 1779, the eve of the most glorious Sant'Alberto of the Carmelite abbots, after lunch from the church of Maria Santissima in Trapani, where the sacred head of this saint resides, the devout people go there to witness the extraction of the catuni, which is taken from the head of the silver statue, annually. It is then transported amidst the applause of the people to the church of the Carmine inside the city, where with great pomp and special jubilation it makes its solemn entrance, and where it receives all the honors that are mainly accorded to a citizen hero and patron saint. On the 26th of February 1790, Maria Santissima of Trapani was acclaimed and proclaimed co-patron saint of the city together with Sant'Alberto. In June 1820, revolutionary uprisings broke out in Palermo for the independence of the island from the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies in the hands of the Bourbons. It was decided to transfer the Simulacrum together with the statue of Sant'Alberto on the 13th of August. After more than a year, public order having been restored, they both returned to the sanctuary. After the revolutionary interlude, the Carmelite friars commissioned the painting The Solemn Transport of the Madonna of Trapani, oil on canvas dated 1822, from Francesco Cutrona, from Trapani, which is now in the Museo Pepoli in Trapani. In it, towards the foot of the mountain, under a canopy, the Virgin is led to her sanctuary. The town is enclosed by strong walls from which rise the church of San Pietro with its bell tower, the bell tower of the monastery of the Badianuva, and the barracks of the Spaniards. It is surrounded by countryside and salt pans. To the north, the long row of arches of the aqueduct stands out. Along the route, 7 small chapels with altars display the mysteries of the Holy Virgin. Along the route, members of the confraternity of the Bianchi, militia, religious, women and children, people cheer joyfully, turning their arms to the sky or praying on their knees. Lying on the coast is the tuna fishery of San Giuliano Palazzo. To the right, the majestic bell tower of the Carmelite complex, which is connected to the town by a causeway through marshy territory. Today, the chapels in Via del Arti, Via 30 Gennaio, and Via Conte Agostino Pepoli survive. In 1837, because of cholera, a procession was held accompanied by moments of festive devotion to Sant'Alberto and voices shouting, "E kai non simu trapanisi, sulu quonu simu malati lu chiamamu, ita maxilla enortra Santa Vuci," and the people echoed, "Viva Maria e Santu Libertu." In 1848, there was yet another transport due to insurrections for the Sicilian emancipation from the Bourbon government. The year 1866 marked the suppression of the religious orders with the emptying of the cenobia, which changed their use. Thus the convent was the site of primary schools, housed the medico condotto, and served as a carabinieri barracks. Then silence fell, interrupted in 1905 by Count Agostino Pepoli, who built the city museum there, donating the artistic and book heritage, both personal and family. Tourists arriving from the city center catch a glimpse of an early 20th century abiveratori with medieval, Romanesque, Gothic, Moorish and Renaissance features, built perhaps on the remains of an ancient fountain created by the Carmelite friars as a refreshment place for pilgrims and their animals. This is followed by the beautiful garden of the Pepoli Municipal Villa with its facade, late 14th century Gothic portal with an ogival shape, 14th century rose window and monumental Baroque bell tower. Entering the temple, on the central door, is the majestic and recent organ from 1981. Along the walls are paintings by Giuseppe Felice on highlights from the life of the Blessed Virgin Mary and a painting by Domenico La Bruna with the Madonna in Glory among Angels, Sant'Alberto, Evo, Giovanni Evangelista, Luigi Robert upright, and at the foot, the city of Trapani. The wooden vara with columns that was carried by arms and the wheeled cart, used as a pilgrim throne, are also preserved. The altar, framed by a magnificent triumphal arch, surrounded by a 17th century walnut choir, built by Carmelite friar Leonardo Maltesi, is placed under a high oval-shaped dome. The beautiful polychrome marble floor in the chapel and shrine of the Blessed inaugurated on the 31st of July, 1956, designed by architect and engineer Decio Attilio Morone from Trapani. A memorial parchment and a medallion of the Madonna were placed in the mortar used for the placement. All that remains of the ancient monastery are the perimeter walls with portals, windows, single lancet windows, some roofs, a tufa tile depicting a ploughing referring to the Annunziata millstone, and a fragment of a marble lintel depicting a man on horseback trampling a dragon. Visitors to the cloister and convent are offered a journey through the history of Trapani. Portals, windows and single lancet windows, ancient city doors, statues, inscriptions, tombstones, tiled floors originally found inside churches or noble palaces, reliefs, fragments of buildings, manuscripts and incunabula. During the period from 1897 to 1909, there were fears that the temple would collapse. The state property and the municipality closed the 3 doors of the perilous facade with a temporary wall. The structure was uninhabitable for several years, risked falling into ruin, and even suffered theft. With the beginning of the 20th century, the transport of the Simulacrum took on the canons of a real procession. This was the case on the 13th of August 1920 for the victory in the First Great War. At the behest of Pope Pius XI, a second crowning of the Blessed Virgin Mary took place, and part of the donations was used for the casting of the 2 new golden crowns. Another transport was made for the occasion, recounted in the writings of Vito Buccellato. She left her sanctuary in Borgo Annunziata at 4 p.m. and arrived in the city at 7 p.m. on the 10th of August 1935. She returned to Borgo Annunziata to her sanctuary on the 18th of August at midnight. After a series of extensive restoration works, the Great Temple was reopened for worship on the 31st of July 1943. At the end of the Second World War, on the 10th of August 1947, a procession was held on a cart pulled by 3 pairs of oxen and surrounded by 12 religious men in the role of keepers of a very precious treasure. On this occasion, the so-called Ululata di Angeli was introduced, in which children dressed as angels flew suspended from a cable stretched between 2 opposite balconies. On the 25th of March 1950, Pope Pius XII elevated the shrine to the status of Basilica Pontificia Minor for the Jubilee of the Holy Year. For the occasion, the superb basilica altar with baldachin, surmounted by 4 bronze statues by Domenico Lee Muley, an artist from Trapani, was built to the design by Decio Attilio Morone, an architect and engineer from Trapani. The following the 10th of August, another transport was carried out. On the occasion of the Marian year, a new procession took place. The festivities began on the evening of the 31st of July, 1954. A holy night was celebrated at the marina, to which the Trapanese responded in large numbers by attending races, various games and swimming competitions. Who knows if they perceived that this would be the last transport. After being stationed in the cathedral, the statue returned to the sanctuary on the 17th of August. For the Holy Year of Renewal and Reconciliation, in 1975, the desire grew to welcome Our Lady to the ancient city. A group of experts, however, confirmed the state of non-transportability due to some cracks between the marble veins. On the 30th of January 2006, Our Lady was confirmed as the main patron saint of the Diocese of Trapani. The liturgical feast, celebrated on the 16th of August, is preceded by the Quindicina, in which devotion is intensified through prayer, and Uviagiu Marona. On entering the chapel of the Madonna, the women recite the prayer of Vincenzo Licotta, Bedra en cielu, Bedra en terra, Bedra siti en paradisu, Bedru ilu vostru viju, pi stu bambinu kai aviti en braza, facitimi star razia, jo star razia la Vulia, Bedra di Trapani Maria. The Virgin attracts believers from outside the province, such as from Sinaisi and Terracini, where on the morning of the 12th of August they begin the journey to reach the shrine on the 14th, reciting, Ti salutu gran signora, simu presenti li piccatura, sius giusgadu kai en idati, perdonati li nostri peccati. Another celebratory moment, on Good Friday, sees Our Lady wearing a black silk mantle, and appearing as the Queen of Sorrows. The words of Friar Eliseo Castoro resound in the mind. The sanctuary is not a museum but a place of faith, history and art that does not end in the past, but is projected into the future as a horizon of faith, always on the way to truth. Thanks to the beauty of being of religious faith.